When you look at risk management, there's three major categories. You've got hazard, you've got vulnerability, and you've got risk. There are different sort of mathematical relationships and equations for this. In an emergency management or disaster management context, you'll hear hazard times vulnerability equals risk, or likelihood times consequence equals risk, or some sort of combination of word risk. The concept or the idea is you have the thing that is hurting you, the way that you get hurt, and then you have the end result, total understanding of that thing. You'll have a tornado, you'll have you being a human that gets hurt by a tornado, and then you have the understanding of how you are affected by tornadoes. Here's an example of why this matters. If there's a tornado in a desert with no one in it, you don't care because you had the hazard, but you didn't have the vulnerability. If you have a nursery or a daycare full of young children, they are highly vulnerable, but if nothing bad ever happens, there's no risk. So you need them both, right? How does one define a disaster? Well, it was a hurricane. Well, no, it wasn't, because the hurricane didn't hit anything. What is the disaster we're talking about? What is the risk? Well, it's when the hurricane hit that coastline and then X number of people died and there's X amount of property damage, right? The risk was kind of what happened, and what happened was a product of the thing doing the damage and the way you took it. Why does this matter? Because sometimes you can directly target the hazard and eliminate the hazard entirely. But if you still have the vulnerability, something else hits that vulnerability and you get impacted anyways. Conversely, you can eliminate a vulnerability, but a hazard can hit other vulnerabilities depending on how overarching it is. So let's say you want to eliminate the risk of your house flooding. So if I want to prevent something, usually the strategy would be to completely eliminate the hazard or completely eliminate the vulnerability. If I want to eliminate the risk of flooding entirely, so but my house cannot flood, make it so it's impossible. If I want to target the hazard, I can eliminate water. Right, that's sci-fi. Okay. If I'm specifically eliminating flooding from a river, I could live far from a river. I could live in high elevation. I could have a floating castle like a children's movie, I suppose. If I want to eliminate the vulnerability, I sell my house. One cannot have a flooded house if one has no house. This might seem ridiculous. You might be like, that's absurd. I want my house. Consider, the renter doesn't lose property when it floods. Also, many businesses don't want to incur the risk of losing a particular asset, so they just sell the asset and they outsource, so they don't have to worry about losing it. And they reallocate the resources they gain from selling the asset into something that's a higher priority because they don't want to deal with the risk of having to worry about this asset. This relationship and the way you target things can matter. So when you're thinking about hazard, vulnerability, risk, and all of this, there is some math that can go into it, but as far as we're concerned doing this stuff, you don't actually need the math. You just need the general understanding that we're focusing on risks, but the risk is a product of the bad thing hurting something in some way. And this is generally not additive, it's multiplicative. So if you understand the difference between something being additive or multiplicative and how like math translates to reality, the reality is that if you become more vulnerable by something, it's not a small difference, it's a big difference. If the hazard gets bigger, it's not a small difference, it's a big difference. It is a multiplier. It is not an additive thing. The difference between your house flooding from a faucet being left on and in 100-year record torrential downpour is a few tiles were wet, or maybe we had a layer and the house is gone. Okay, so these are very big differences, right? The difference in vulnerability, same hazard of someone falling to the ground 6 feet, so falling off of a ladder. If you are young, healthy, and you've fallen before, so someone who does judo or wrestling or something, so they know how to fall, that person falls versus somebody who is 85 with brittle bone disease and is 150 pounds overweight compared to what their doctor would recommend. One of these two people is going to take that fall better. The vulnerability was the only difference. The hazard was the same. You can apply the same thing to business, right? The same type of idea. Okay, that's the basic idea. Hazard, vulnerability, risk. This will come into play a bit later. We'll be using likelihood and consequence for the risk matrix later. Likelihood is the same type of idea of how often does the bad thing happen. Consequence is what happens because of the bad thing. What are the consequences of it? And then the risk would be the representation of how bad this thing is and what we're going to think about it, how we're going to deal with it. That's the basic idea. On the topic of risk assessments, there is a word or an acronym, a jargon term called HIRA. HIRA, Hazard Identification Risk Assessment. Technically, what we're doing is a HIRA. If you were someone who has done HIRAs before, this is actually a simplified version of a HIRA. That it's weird because most HIRAs that are done, they don't actually generate the likelihood and consequence portions. So you end up taking somebody else's that doesn't apply to you, and the whole HIRA is basically garbage. So most of the HIRAs I've seen are actually just garbage and useless. Even like professional ones and ones done by governments, like a lot of them are they're just a waste of time. So I'm just going to show you a way to do a HIRA from scratch that is more effective and not a waste of your time. If I say the word HIRA, as far as if you're a layperson, I'm just saying risk assessment, don't worry about it. But if you're someone who deals with HIRAs, when you see how likelihood and consequences are generated and why I'm placing the importance on this, it'll make more sense. But just want to let you know if you hear HIRA, it's a jargon term and that's why. Okay, we have that. And there's something called the 3 R's in really resiliency, but one of the R's is resiliency, so whatever. But you have the 3 R's, which are resiliency, redundancy, and robustness. When you are looking at, it's kind of recovery-based, but it's also response-based. When you're looking at dealing with risks in general, some areas have looked at them through this whole 3 R's theorem. And basically, there are 3 major characteristics that make up whether or not something is good at dealing with bad stuff, so risks. Resiliency is your kind of like mental fortitude. So someone is more resilient if they're able to deal with a major trauma and then not have it affect their day-to-day decision-making as quickly. So that person, lost their house and they were so resilient, they were able to get back on their feet and focus on whatever right away. They were very resilient. Or they were able to recover and now they have a new house again. It's only been X amount of time. Like whatever, they were very resilient. They were able to It's not about whether they have resources, it's about sort of mental toughness, or sometimes it can be cultural toughness too, because a culture is more resilient if it's able to kind of band together quickly and assist with these sorts of things. This is like a social cohesion sort of term. This is relevant because with a lot of emergencies, a resiliency strategy would be one where you would look at making people better at working with people, or making people more resistant to traumas, or more resistant to, not traumas isn't the right word, more resistant to incidents, like very large events happening. That's the idea. Okay. We then have redundancy. Now, redundancy is about having a backup, basically. So if you take a regular backup onto an external drive for your computer, you have a redundant hard drive. So if your hard drive doesn't work for whatever reason, if it's dead, then you have a redundant drive and you've saved your data. Redundancies are probably the most common adopted solution in continuity. They're the first thing that people tend to go to. I have seen some continuity professionals that exclusively only know redundancy exists. There are definitely more strategies than redundancy, but redundancy is one of the first things people go to. So the principle of redundancy is basically having a backup, having a second. Yeah, that's the idea. Then you have robustness. Now, robustness is your ability to take a hit. And this is because you're large. So, for example, the most robustness examples that are given are with like a boxing match or something. So a boxer punches someone in the stomach. Person one weighs, 100 pounds and does not have any training. Person two is a sumo wrestler and weighs X number of pounds and is used to taking blows to the stomach. The sumo wrestler is more robust. They are going to take the blow easier. Another example of this would be large organizations one of the best examples for this is actually Walmart. Walmart is known to be exceptionally good at emergency management and a lot of this risk stuff. During Hurricane Katrina, there is a reason why Walmart was the major logistics organization the Red Cross went to manage Katrina's logistics. Walmart's very good at this. Walmart is very robust. Walmart does not feel, internationally, it does not feel if you steal one bag of chips. It does not notice. Now, look, they're going to have security things in place, deterrence. They're not going to want you to steal chips. This isn't me saying go out and steal potato chips. But the reality is that to Walmart, the impact of one bag of chips being stolen is negligible to the point of not even caring. They are simply too large. An individual Walmart store could be burned to the ground and Walmart would recover. And that is an entire store. And Walmart would recover at such a speed it would baffle people. Another incredibly robust organization in 2025 is Amazon. Amazon can incur impacts that would absolutely blow most people's minds. They are so quick. They are able to recover so quickly. They're so robust. They have another fulfillment center. It is incredible how robust some organizations can be. Conversely, if you are a ma and pa convenience store and your convenience store burns to the ground, you do not have robustness left in that system. Another way of thinking about robustness could be surge capacity. So hospitals, for example, will have a certain degree of surge capacity, extra staff that they can bring on in case of too many people coming in, more than expected. You have your standard staffing levels, then you have your sort of surge levels where, okay, we have to have capacity to be able to increase our ability to take in patients. Now, a lot of hospital networks have been operating at surge capacity forever and don't really have surge capacity anymore, but fair enough. But in general, that's the idea. This is their ability to be robust, ability to absorb an impact. So when you're thinking about solutions, some people have found it helpful. If you haven't gotten good solutions through with prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, sometimes the resiliency, redundancy, robustness thing can help you there too. And they kind of bleed over. So there's other concepts in there that help.